Welcome to the LUX Audience Award 2025, where cinema and political civic engagement go hand in hand. I am pleased to moderate the debate with representatives of the finalist films in this competition organized by the European Parliament. In this edition, as usual, there is a wide range of stylistic and linguistic diversity, with co-production being a trademark. Workers' rights, harassment of minors, the war in Ukraine, neocolonialism, and the climate crisis are in the spotlight this year. These themes have been explored in animation, fiction, documentary, and sometimes in a mix of genres. I would like now to introduce the guests who I thank for their presence here in Brussels. Welcome everyone, and congratulations already for being selected for this final competition. So with me we have Sofia Ezarchou from Greece. She's the director of Animal. On the other side, Mati Diop from France is the director of Daomé. Oksana Karpovic, to keep on the ladies, from Ukraine, is the director of Intercepted. Closer to me, further from me, Leonardo van Dijk from Belgium is the director of Julie Keeps Quiet. And finally, Gregory Zaltman is the producer of Flow, that was directed by Gins Zibalodis from Latvia. So I just mentioned the various themes that were covered by all these beautiful films. I would like to start by asking what was your process from being interested in a topic and actually creating a concrete narrative about that topic? And I could start here with Sofia.
Well, yes, after finishing my first film, I had the idea that I want to make a film about work and working conditions in Greece, but also in Europe in general, I would say in capitalistic societies. And because I'm Greek, I had the idea that my working system is going to be an all-inclusive hotel. And I'm going to place my story inside an all-inclusive hotel and trying to spotlight the workers inside the system, and specifically the entertainers, because the movie talks about the life of a group of animators who work in a hotel and trying to entertain people every night.
I understood you did a lot of research. You saw hours and hours, endless hours of people that work in these conditions. This was important for your production after?
Yes, because I was born in Greece, so I know all the hotel industry, but I've never been to this kind of hotel. So I had to know the machine, how it works. So I did a lot of research. I managed to enter to many hotels and to see actually how the people work there, but that was not enough. So, now I think YouTube is a very nice tool for directors, so you can find everything in YouTube. So I searched a lot, and I saw animators in Greece, in Mediterranean, in Latin America, on cruise boats, everywhere, in order to understand better what they do and how I'm gonna put that in my script.
And Gregory, climate change, of course, is at the heart of this beautiful movie that combines let's say, the classic approach in terms of the images, but also a lot of new technology for creating this beautiful film. What was the process having the idea of telling the climate change story and all the challenges of animation?
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of the director, Gins Zibalodis. First, he wanted to make a movie about a cat who is afraid of water, because he wanted to tell something about himself, because you often say to directors or writers, speak about something that you know, tell something about what you know, and he wanted to tell something about what he was living, and he was like afraid of working with other people. Gins did his first movie called Away, complete by himself, all alone. So when you see the credits of this movie, there's only one name, and it's not arrogance, it's just because he did it really. And he wanted for his next movie, Flow, to collaborate with people. So like the cat who was afraid of water, he was afraid to work with people, so he wanted to speak also about himself in this process. So of course, Flow, one of the topic, it's about the fragility of our environment, but it's also about facing our fears of other people, in this movie of other animals.
Is it also that we need also collaboration to tackle both your personal challenges and such a global challenge as climate change. We are not alone in this planet, and we have to work together for that.
Like he said, I would say at the Oscars, we are all on the same boat. We are interconnected, and we need to work together. We don't have any other choice, basically.
Wonderful. Oksana, I would like to ask, you were on the ground working with journalists. So in Ukraine, you visit a lot of the areas that were being affected by the Russian invasion, of course. And then you came up with these excerpts of audio conversations between the Russian soldiers and their families. And from this experience, how did you build the narrative of your film?
I was just actually going to say that it's not that I was interested in the subject of the war, it's that the war came to my home, and there are certain life circumstances that don't leave us choice. And as a documentary filmmaker and artist, I'm generally interested in justice and human rights. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, I was there on the spot, and I felt that it was my duty as an artist to respond to the circumstances and do my best to shine light on the truth on what was happening. And in that sense, intercepted phone calls that I discovered online on the official YouTube channels of Ukraine Security Services really became that source of material, that source of information that I think I found very powerful and efficient in telling the truth about the invasion. I was interested to research and to understand why humans in general commit such horrible crimes, what pushes them towards such actions, what kind of mentality, what kind of ideas are behind the Russian invasion. What motivated me was also the fact that here in the West, very quickly, people called this invasion Putin's war. And I felt that it's not fair, because it's not just an invasion that is done by one individual. There are, unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of people involved directly. And I really wanted to know what is their motivation.
And Oksana, like Sophia a little bit, I've heard that you went through like 35 hours of material, and you have a very interesting process of using what the soldiers are saying, but then you constructed a narrative with specific images of the daily life of Ukrainians, what is going to be needed in terms of reconstruction. Also, you hint onto the war crimes that were committed. So how did you combine a material that came to you and something that you create also with the images?
I listened to, 31 hours of audio. To be precise, it's hundreds of unique audio recordings, unique conversations. And what they were telling me, they were basically telling me the story of this invasion from the very beginning to the mass mobilization in Russia. That was the period I focused on.
Yes.
I focused on the recordings that were coming from 2022. But what I was also thinking about a lot in the very beginning of the invasion is how it was portrayed in the mass media, and the fact that the news generally, the media, social media as well, somehow they flatten a very complex reality that they don't, they cannot show everything, but there are certain aspects that are absolutely lost in the media. And I wanted to create a film that would show it all the different dimensions of the war, of violence, of the effect of this violence, the impact of the violence on the daily life of the most ordinary people
and
in Ukraine.
And it's really a very beautiful visual film, besides of the whole the message indeed. Leonardo, Julie Keeps Quiet is about silences, is about dialogues, relations between teenagers and adults, be their teachers, their family, but also among themselves, and how they pressure each other to speak or not to speak about what affects them. So how did you come to this idea of tackling, harassment of minors in this such a quiet way?
For me, when I started the project 5 years ago in that way, we were in the midst of #MeToo. And I guess I had an issue with, again, like how let's say the media or like the public discourse was talking about victims in that way. It was very polarized because there was much pressure on people to come out and come forward with stories in that way to, like make a clean shit. At the same time, those people who did were often, like just completely scrutinized and not really, I guess, like getting the kind of
Protection that they might need as well?
protection, or like, I would say like more just a kind of distinct language. And so what I tried to do with my movie, I wanted to bring back kindness into that narrative. Because everybody, like before silence is being broken in that way, there is always silence. And it takes a journey in that way, and it takes bravery to break it. And as I said, like we think sometimes it's normal. We put so much pressure on a victim to come forward, to disclose their private life in a public scene. But I wanted to aim to tell, like, if somebody sets foot into that public world, it's not necessarily because they want to be seen. It's not because they want to be heard. It's because if they don't speak up, they know they cannot longer live with themselves.
And
they don't speak up in that way, like for themselves, but they do it for you. They do it for us in that way. It's a kind of like, they do that because they want to build a society that will protect new generations.
Can you add why you selected this protagonist? I mean, it was a cast, of course, but she had no experience whatsoever before. Was this important for you?
Well, so it's set in the world of tennis, and for me it was very normal to work with real tennis players. Again, when it comes to victims, when they come forward with stories, they're always like, questioned, like how believable it is what they say. So if I would have worked with a girl who didn't know how to hit a ball, that would affect the authenticity of this character. So I knew that I had to work with real tennis players. And that was a very interesting task, because in that way also you could really work within that world with the people who know it in that way, to bring a kind of authenticity on it that I feel that made the silence of Julie so much richer.
Yeah, she's really great. And Mati, I think you were quite surprised by the announcement by President Macron of the restitution of these artworks to the former kingdom of Dahomey, and you were closely looking what was going to happen after this announcement. And then how did you develop your film?
I must say I was a bit perplexed by this announcement. Because the topic of restitution in France so far was completely buried. It was obviously a quite deep taboo. So it was indeed a shock, this announcement. But when in 2021 I discovered in the press that 26 treasures from Dahomey that were looted during colonization were about to be repatriated in Benin by France. I learned it in the press, and 2 weeks after, the repatriation was actually happening. And so it was only 2 weeks. And I already had a feature in mind about the topic of restitution. So it's been already 5 years that I was thinking about how to find a form to that topic, field, and I decided to dedicate a film to this restitution in particular because I thought it was quite historical, that it couldn't stay just a story in the media that you forget the day after. And as a filmmaker, I felt like you also said that it was my duty to make sure that restitution would be fixed in time, in history, by portraying this moment in a subjective way, of course, but also the idea to archive and to document a moment that would have, I think, wouldn't exist in the same way if it hasn't been portrayed by cinema. And
How come you decided to engage the university students? And
Yes, I
that
was-
make the film quite live in the sense that you have people very engaged, reflecting about what is, the impact of this restitution.
So yeah, I was getting there. It's one thing to decide to dedicate a film to something, to a topic, to a person, but then which form? And the form was actually to choose the point of view of the statues themselves, of the artifacts, to turn them to subjects and to propose a rupture from the objectivization they've been imprisoned in, and to allow the debate of restitution to be restituted to the youth of Benin, to a certain youth. I chose students in a university because for me the main gesture of this film was to create a counterpoint, to hear the point of view of a certain African youth about restitution. It's a topic that so far was not taken in charge.
So you give voice to
by the
other
Africans,
people.
by
Yeah.
the dispossessed, and by the youth who, to my opinion, should be the most concerned, because it's the generation which didn't grow up with the traces of their pasts.
Yeah.
And I thought it was extremely important to create a conversation between this youth and her history through the artifacts.
So, like I said, we are here, cinema a competition at European Parliament. We are at crossroads between, culture, civic engagement. In a time with increasing disinformation and propaganda, how do you think that cinema and storytelling in general contribute to stir up the conversations, the dialogue, to create social change? Sophia?
Well, we were discussing yesterday with Leo that I think for me, the most important thing that movies can do is to open some doors of thought, There is all this huge information, all this going on politically all around the world. It's, I think, quite strange times and scary
You're talking
times.
about the nationalistic, populistic trend.
Yes, and many other stuff that's going on right now. And I think cinema can have an input in opening doors and way of thinking that are sometimes in the shadows or people ignore or don't want to look at. And I think that's quite important. I think all of the films that are here this year have their own aspect regarding that.
Oksana, propaganda and disinformation are at heart somehow of your film. So do you see yourself also as an actor in this process of stirring up the dialogue?
Definitely. It's not, when I started working on my film, it's not something I was thinking directly, I want to create an anti-propaganda film, a counter-propaganda film to fight Russian propaganda. It's not what I was thinking about. I was making this film, it was really coming out of my heart. I was sincerely and deeply involved in what was happening, and I wanted to understand why it was happening. And what happened when the film was finished really surprised me. We had a very long journey, which, it's still lasting, actually. It's still going on. The film is still traveling. And I felt really grateful later to my team and in general for this opportunity to create this work, because I realized the effect it had on people around the world, and how I think we managed to develop the discourse about the Russian society and the Russian invasion of Ukraine thanks to our film and thanks to our Q&As and presentations.
I also wanted to talk about the co-productions between 2 or more countries. All these films are co-productions. And what are the opportunities, but also the challenges and difficulties of multiculturalism, of working in different languages or different teams?
I would say it's vital. It's vital because movies is a very expensive form of art, first of all. So because you work with a whole team. When you see the end credits of a movie, you realize how many people are working on a movie. So in development, you're starting to make some budget of the movie you want to do, and you realize that it will be expensive. And in most countries, maybe the smaller countries, you cannot raise all the budget for making your movie. So you need to open yourself to other countries. And it's not only about getting financing in other countries, it's also about getting another point of view. So in the case of Flow, it was initiated in Latvia, quite a small country. So Gins, the director, worked for several years with the Latvian producer Matīs Kaza on the development, but at one point they needed to open themselves first to get money, but also because in our specific case, in Latvia, they have a lack of animators, 3D animators, so they need also the creative input of other countries, France and Belgium in our case.
What about you, Matti? Because in this case, it's a cooperation between a former colonial power and the former colony as well.
I think I was more interested by the previous question about our choices as filmmakers to propose another gaze on history. Sorry if I can go back to the previous question.
And then we can follow up.
I think on my film it's a more interesting question than co-production. We are really in a post-truth era, and I think we are getting almost into a paroxysm of falsification history with an American president who already has a list of books to banish. So we are at a highly extreme critical point, but I think that a lot of filmmakers I'm part of it, were already in the gesture of restituting a narrative, a sense of history that is often betrayed in the media. In the case of the topics I'm interested by, who are really close also to my cultural dynamic and experience, such as emigration. At the time where Senegalese migrants were pretty much dishumanized and reduced to victims and invaders, it was absolutely urgent to use the cinema of tool to restitute a narrative, to restitute the complexity of a situation, to re-existentialize it, and mostly to create a space where the actors of the fact can control their own words on their own reality. I think it's very important to create spaces where people can have control on their own narrative.
And Leonardo, are you worried about freedom of expression limits that are being put to freedom of expression in Europe and elsewhere?
First of all, I think there is a difference in that way between documentary and fiction. I'm really worried about these things, but to say fiction is not there to tell the truth. Everything you do is a construction, it's a lie. And in that way, you know, we are in the arts of manipulating as well. Sadly, I feel that now media also becomes just like fiction in that way. That's bad. But I would refer, for example, to Sophocles. So when I started my movie in that way, like thinking about Julie and this character, it was in that way like it needed to have an impact ahead in time, because you can have an idea, but it takes a long time to actually make a movie. And then once the movie comes out, it needs to have a dialogue with the world, but hopefully, you know, like in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years, it will still have a dialogue and maybe pose questions that I never really intended to put in that story, but because of the world that has changed, are now being offered. And so you go to Sophocles in that way. What I did, I was inspired by Antigone. Antigone is a 15-year-old girl. Her brother gets killed in a fight. She goes to the state. She says, like, I want to bury my brother. And the state says, like, he cannot be buried because he's an enemy of the state. And she says, yeah, he's an enemy of the state, but he's also a human being, and human beings have the right to be buried. And we are still now, every, era, Antigone pops up and it gets a new interpretation and poses us new questions. Some will say that she is like, the first one who is like, I guess, like, what is the name, like, the human, civil disobedience.
Yeah.
I would say she's an advocate for human rights. Then and somebody else will say she was a feminist. It doesn't really matter in that way, like.
So it remains very contemporary.
It remains like that,
Yes.
and that's, for example, like how I think in fiction you should tell the stories. It's not about who I am as a director, but what is this character, and how will this character be out there in the world and have the conversation with the audience.
We are coming close to the end of our program. I wanted to ask a last question that I ask you kindly to reply in a more, let's say, briefly way. How does it mean for each of you to participate in this kind of competition? It's quite unique in the sense that the final movie is selected by members, politicians that were elected and members of the audience, the civil society. So, Sophia.
Well, I think the most important thing about this nomination is that there are all these screenings around Europe, and that as the way the European audience can reach these movies, that sometimes they are not distributed in all these countries. So for me, that was the biggest privilege of this competition, and I'm happy to be part of this selection.
Gregory?
Yeah, I don't feel it's like a competition, actually. I think it's
a film festival, film fest.
It's a kind of festival, because what we celebrate here is the diversity of European cinema in all its genres, animation, movie, documentary, live action, very different movies. So I'm not sure you can really make a competition between so much different kind of movies. So it feels like more like a celebration, and see all the richness of what we can propose and see on our screens.
Wonderful. Oksana, how has it been for you to be part of this film festival and competition?
I simply agree. I think it's already an achievement to be here and celebrate our work, our interests, our causes, to give them more space, again, more room. I think that was a privilege for me as well, to know that our film was shown all around Europe, outside of festivals, much smaller screenings, but thanks to those smaller screenings, we reached to a much wider public, so that was great.
Leonardo, how has it been the experience? Were you really happy and surprised when you were selected? And what do you expect for your career having passed through this experience?
I honestly, when I heard the news, I was just super happy, as in, wow, the journey continues in that way. And the ultimate prize is indeed that normally it's almost like the one who wins will get all the screenings. Here, everybody gets the screenings, and then there is somebody who wins. And as I said earlier, it's fantastic because you make movies so they can be in dialogue with audiences. And that's what they do so well, because they really facilitate in creating the events around it. And even though I am not there, they will have the conversation afterwards about the movie and about the subject. And that's fantastic in that way, that I actually almost have to do nothing. And like that, they take that movie and they spread the message out. So for me, it was just like, it's fantastic, and also a huge honor to be with directors that I really, really admire.
I guess so, Matti. Also, the convivial aspect of the kind of gatherings is important, no?
Yes, I only can share what my colleagues just said. And also, of course, for me, and I'm sure for you, it's the same, it's always a context that can bring more light to a topic that it's quite invisibilized, yet one, I think, of the most important topic of the century, the restitution. So it's always a thrill and a deep satisfaction to know that the film is being viewed by more and more and more people and more audience, as I know the film can bring another kind of sensibility to this topic, which is complex, which were, like I said, pretty much buried so far. So it's always it means always everything to me to know that more audience will reach out to the very complex issue of restitution.
I cannot resist to make a final provocation. Is European cinema alive and kicking, or it still needs a lot of support in order to reach as much audience, not only in Europe, but all around the world? Sophia, do you have a recipe?
I think it's not so alive and kicking as Europe is not so alive and kicking. It feels quite old Europe right now, and something has to happen to, to what you say, to kick a little bit. But I think European cinema is not at its best. It's true.
What about Gregory? Cinema?
I would be more optimistic.
Okay, that's a good thing.
I think it's really alive. I see unbelievably beautiful movies done here in Europe. So, I don't know, I discover always some beauty, and could be very small movies as more a bigger movie. It doesn't make a difference. We can make, in Europe, we have the chance to make really some independent movies without, I think, any influence from people above telling you what to put in you without any censorship. So it's quite a privilege.
Censorship you start getting, I don't agree so much. I think there is many events the last decades, also in my country, about censorship. And of course, there are beautiful films still, I agree, but I think there is a kind of numbness. Like Europe is numb, and also European films feel a bit numb. Yes, we don't see things that surprise us so often. And although there is the freedom of creation, because it's state funding and all that stuff, it looks like a box a little bit the last decades, the European cinema, how it's being funded and how it plays out in the end.
Do you see a bright future for documentary, Oksana, in Europe?
Well, I'm coming from the context that is outside of European Union. In Ukraine, we have an extremely difficult situation right now because we almost have no funds for cinema. Everything goes to war. So actually, it's also like making a little step back to your previous question about co-production. In my case, that was what saved us. If not our international partners, Canada and France, Arte, we would not have been able to make this film. So for us, it's a much more complex situation. But what I see, what I observe watching films of my colleagues in festivals is I wish in Europe there were more political films. And it's not about fiction or non-fiction. For me, those divisions doesn't matter. I'm coming from East Europe, where art in general is very political. We are coming from a very complex historical background, and we are grown in this space. You have no choice not to be political. But I wish this was also something more present here in the West.
Leonardo, I think you are also young. I mean, there is at least a bright young generation in European cinema. You are part of it as well. Do you feel optimistic or not so much as Sophia?
It's a difficult question again, because I believe in a way that we have to keep it alive. It's not because it's alive today that it will be tomorrow in that way. So it's always like in that way we have to put out the work. And I would say in that way, there is a quote from Toni Morrison where she says, like, if you want to read a book, but it hasn't been written yet, then go and write it yourself. And what the case was in Julie, in a way, like it came almost like from a desire that I wanted to see that movie. Mm-hmm. And because it wasn't been made, almost I tried to make it myself in order to see it. And afterwards, although it was almost like a very intimate experience in that way, like there were so many more people who turned out to also were waiting for that movie. And in
so
that way...
that can be very inspirational
and that
for
can be
others.
inspirational. Was it in that way, like, a huge mainstream, I don't know, like event? No, but I know that the movie meant something for some people. And in that way, it was alive.
And Matti, what about you? Also from, a younger generation of filmmakers, are you optimistic about the future of European cinema?
I think it's difficult to portray the European cinema in general, I still experience some very strong film. Yet I'm not sure Europe is still the place where the strongest cinema is coming from today since a long time. I cannot think about the issue Europe is facing right now, which is the rise of extreme rights and neo-fascism. I think that's my everyday concern in terms of future of cinema. I wouldn't doubt 5 years ago, will I be able to defend the cinema I am defending as a French African filmmaker, as a binational filmmaker? Will I have the same freedom in 3 years if extreme rights wins in France, which is, let's be lucid, not very far away to happen? Will I be able to defend the same cinema in terms of singularity of language, in terms of decolonial gaze? I'm not sure, and I think that's really a reality we should face quite quite bravely to
Quite challenging, but
Yes.
I really think, I'm hopeful, to be honest, if I am allowed to give my opinion, because you are so right. Your work is wonderful, speaks for itself. I wish you have a lot of success in this particular competition, but in all your careers. Thank you very much for creating beautiful things for us, the audience, to not only watch, but also think about for many, many days after we watch it. That was my experience, at least. Thank you very much. Good luck. Thank you very much for listening to this debate, to have a little bit of a look into the difficulties, but also opportunities of making cinema in Europe.